too loud? I can't tell. Okay, now, I split this up because Australian time zones are particularly confusing, and it's because, it's actually for a couple of reasons. The first one is, and I'm going to ignore it for a second, is daylight savings. And the second thing is that it's not split up beautifully. Like if you look at the map up here in the top corner, you'll notice that it is split like 3 or 4 ways. So you'd expect it to be, going up by an hour, but you can see that here it's actually not. So instead of it being, so remember for us we're +10. So instead of all of this being +10, all of this being +9, this being +8, it's actually +10, +9.5, and +8. So there's actually an hour and a half difference between here and here, and a half an hour distance between here and here instead of just hours. So that in itself is a little bit confusing. Secondly, actually, we'll talk about daylight savings in a sec, but let's just start with that. One easier way to do it is to do it on the timeline, like is what I was doing last lesson. So 0, you could think of that as like our Australian reference point. You could think of it as being here. So this is like our 0. And then here is an hour and a half, and here is half an hour. So that's kind of what this timeline shows. Whatever makes more sense to you. If you like that to be an 8 and a 9.5 and a 10, then that's perfectly fine. But if not, you can just think of them having 0, or you could think of this as 0, and this is a negative half an hour, and negative 1.5 hours, whatever you like. Just however you work these out is up to you. Anyway, okay, this person's in Perth, and it's 11:30 a.m. He wants to ring his mother in Sydney. He wants to know what time that's going to be. So what I do is just, again, draw a timeline. Have that tool selected. So draw a timeline. There's my timeline. I'll put our 3 states on it. So Perth or WA. In the middle is, should we call it South Australia? Or, let me get that thing. Where is Australia? There it is. Let's get that in there. Let's call that Northern Territory, South Australia, and this one New Zealand, New South Wales, no, New Zealand. If it's 11:30 here, keep in mind that's like 8, that's 9.5, that's 10. Okay, so if it's 11:30 here, what time is it in Sydney? Well, this jump is 1.5 hours. This jump is 0.5. So I'm doing the same thing here. So I'm going to do, so my Perth time is 11:30. That means my New South Wales or Sydney time is 11:30. Keep in mind that it's AM. I add 1.5 hours and I add 0.5 hours. So that's just here, I add 1.5, I add 0.5, I end up with this. So what do I end up with? I've got, if I add 1.5 hours, okay, let's add the half an hour first, so that brings me to 12 p.m. Then I add an hour and a half, so that brings me to 1:30 p.m. Keep in mind that these are a lot easier if you just convert everything to 24 hours. Then I don't have to worry about AM and PM, and I can just think of this as 11:30, and I'm adding 1:50. So that's another thing you could keep in mind, but if it's just as easy to do this, then do this. B. This person's just finished work at 5 p.m. in Sydney. So here, what time is it in Adelaide? So Adelaide's in this section. So I'm going from Sydney to Adelaide. That's a really big line. So I'm going from Sydney to Adelaide. So I take away 0.5. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So in Sydney, it's 5 p.m. In Adelaide, it's 5 p.m. Take away half an hour, and that's going to be 4:30 p.m. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes sense. And you can, it's a word problem, you can write a word solution. It is 4:30 p.m. in Adelaide, and it is 1:30 p.m. in Sydney. That's the sort of thing you could write to conclude. All right, now we bring in daylight savings time. The confusing thing about daylight savings is not the fact that we add an hour, but it's the fact that some states choose not to do daylight savings. So anyway, you'll note that let's just look at New South Wales, for example, pretending it's 12 p.m. here. Same as Victoria, same as Tasmania. That's because all of these are the same. Now, Queensland, on the other hand, they don't participate in daylight savings. So that means that instead of the clocks moving forward for them, they stay the same. So you just got to take that into consideration. Now, we knew that going from here to here is taking away half an hour. So half an hour away from 12 is 11:30. But hang on a minute, here it's 10:30. That's because the Northern Territory also doesn't participate in daylight savings. Now we know that from here to here it's meant to be an hour and a half. That's actually 2.5 hours because WA also doesn't participate in daylight savings. So there's a few that don't. So I'll put X's on them. It's this one, and this one. Think of it as the northernmost states. They don't participate in daylight saving. So the advice I'm going to give in questions that take daylight saving into consideration is going to be this. Work it out as if daylight savings is not a thing. Then if you have to deal with one of these three states, then make the adjustment. So firstly, don't make the adjustment. So don't just forget that this exists for a second, make the calculation, and then add daylight savings on if you have to. So I'll go through a next question where they ask for that. So this is the last thing I'm going to do. Okay, so this person's in Melbourne. They want to talk to someone that's in Canada. Canada Pacific Standard Time is 8 hours behind it. Melbourne's 10 hours ahead of it. Now, Canada have daylight savings. So how we're going to start with this one is just pretend this sentence doesn't exist. So daylight savings operate in Canada. Pretend that doesn't exist and we'll work it out. And then we'll add on the daylight savings. So I'm going to draw my timeline. It goes from, let's start with the UTC. What have I got? I've got, so just going left to right, Canada is 8 hours behind. This is going to be -8, and that's Canada. And then Melbourne's 10 hours ahead, so +10, this is Melbourne. Forget about daylight savings for a sec. When should they log on to reach Zach at 4 p.m. Forget about Friday for a sec, in Vancouver. So that's saying that it's 4 p.m. here. So Canada, call time. I don't know why it's putting these dots after each of my letters, but it's annoying me. Is 4 p.m. That means that the Melbourne call time is going to be, now I need the difference. So the difference is that's +8 and that is +10. So the whole difference is going to be 18. So I'm going to do 4 p.m. plus 18 hours. Okay, so sometimes it's a good thing to split it up a little bit. So instead of doing 18 hours all in one go like 4 p.m. plus 12 hours, and then add 6 hours. So 4 p.m. plus 12 hours is going to be 4 a.m. Now keep in mind that this was Friday, and now this is Saturday, because I've added 12 hours, I've gone past midnight. Now I've still got to add 6 hours. So that's going to bring me to 10 a.m. Okay. Now, this hasn't taken into consideration daylight savings. So daylight savings into consideration. Okay, so what does daylight savings actually do? Daylight savings adds an hour. So that adds an hour here. So what that does is here, daylight savings adds an hour. So Canada is actually at -7 rather than being at +8. So what we need to do is kind of go back a little bit. So the difference was 18 hours, whereas, hang on a minute, it's not 18, it's actually 17. So I guess you could have done this at the start of the calculation, probably would have made more sense, but oh well. So if this was a 7, then this would be a 5, and this would be a 5, and it would actually be 9. But I just think of it like I'm adding on an hour. I haven't taken into consideration, so what I need to do is take away an hour. So I'm going to do 10 a.m. take away 1 hour, and that's going to give me 9 a.m. And keep in mind that that's Saturday. So word problem, word solution, you could say, what time could they log on? Simone should log on to Reach at 9 a.m. on Saturday. So however this question or the working out makes sense to you, that's the approach you should take. But I often get confused in questions like this just because there's not much you can do in terms of the math. Like I can't write this with beautiful working out or anything like that. I kind of have to draw diagrams and think about where I'm moving left and right and stuff like that. So it can often be confusing or a source of confusion. So yeah, maybe it does make sense to put the daylight savings in here first. I don't know. But yeah, that's all there is to do with Australian time zones.